All right. As I was saying, what was I saying? So you've got the text on the one hand, right? The text that we're reading, Pride and Prejudice.
Yes.
Okay. Then you have you. We've got how many of you here? We have 6 of us, right? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 readers. Okay. So I would expect that every one of you to have almost like this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 interpretations, okay, of how this text affects you, how this one text affects you. Okay, so you may be reading the same text, yeah, you're reading the same text, but each of you will have your interpretation. Let's do mathematical equation. You've got X, you've got Y, you've got Z, you've got A, you've got B, you've got C. You've got 6 interpretation of the same text. But how is that possible? How can all 6 of us have different understanding of the same text? One of the things that could do that is if we focus on a particular issue. You know, maybe person A or person number 1 is focusing on the issue of gender. And then maybe person number 2 is focusing on the issue of marriage. And maybe person 3 is focusing on what else? The issue of motherhood. Okay, so just by focusing on different issues, you have suddenly developed a different kind of a focus on the said text. You've got 1 focus, 2 focus, 3 focus, 4 focus, 5 focus, and 6 focus. Do you get me so far?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, but we are all reading the same text. It's like trying to describe an animal in the dark, and you're coming from different parts of the animal. Say there is an animal in the room. It's the light is off. You come from the north. Someone else comes from the south, somebody comes from the west and east, and someone else comes from the northwest and all that. You're touching different part of the animal or the object, and you're describing the object or the animal based on what evidence that is before you, that's in front of you. Do you get me so far?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. So the reason I am focusing on this point extensively again and again is because without evidence, okay, without evidence, your argument does not hold water. It's not going to be accepted. All right? So you need to make sure whatever statements that you make, for instance, if you say, Mr. Darcy is a gentleman, Mr. Darcy is very caring, Mr. Darcy is very compassionate. Say you make those kinds of statements. What's the evidence? The evidence must come from his speech, his actions, his thoughts, his mannerisms. Right? Do you follow?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. All right. So that's the bit that I wanted to kind of like focus on. I wanted you to just have that aspect drilled into you, so that whatever statement you make, anytime you are making any kind of a critical observation about any text that you are reading, you know, be it a movie or a song or an advertisement or a novel or a work of poetry, it doesn't matter. You need to ensure it has evidence to support it. And the evidence cannot be, this is what I feel when I read this line. No. It has to be back to elements of literature. Okay, so your evidence must be concrete. So your evidence must be based on, for instance, literary devices, right? So it must be elements of literature. It must be based on elements of literature. What are elements of literature that you know? Can you tell me some?
Themes.
Good. So you've got themes,
Metaphors.
you've got metaphors or figurative figures of speech, huh? Let me just erase this. Okay. You've got figures of speech such as metaphors, alliterations. What else?
The setting of the novel count?
Okay, so that will be, yeah, yes. That will be, those will be elements of literature, the setting. Okay, so, and another thing that we talked about last week, we ended the session towards the end, we were talking about this, the narrative voice, the narrator. Whether you can believe everything the narrator says. Is the narrator a third-person narrator, a first-person narrator, an omniscient narrator, an objective narrator, a biased narrator? So you have to kind of look at the text and evaluate whether or not you can trust whatever the narrator tells you. Because is the narrator giving you everybody's opinion or only a certain character's opinion? Which means you need to evaluate whether the narrator is representing every character or only certain characters, right? So when we look at Pride and Prejudice, you have to ask yourself, do we know specifically what characters like Darcy thinks? Do we get to hear what Darcy thinks? Do we get to hear what Bingley thinks? Do we get to hear what Mr. Bennet thinks? Okay, or are we only seeing a certain perspective? That already indicates to you the narrator's objectivity, the sense of objectivity. You know, it's like you only see the person's perspective if the narrator chooses to let you hear and see it. And if that's the case, then you have to kind of look at the narrator's role a little bit more closely and not take everything the narrator says as evidence, as truth. Are you all right with me so far?
Yes.
Any questions?
No.
Did you all message anything? You all can, you know, as I'm saying, as I'm rambling on to myself in front of the screen, you all can kind of like, you know, type certain things. You know, I just made a joke and nobody chuckled. You know how hurtful that is? Never mind. Okay, I hear a chuckle. I think that's Ranjit. I'm not sure. Okay,
Yes,
so yeah. Now this is supposed to be light and easy, guys. You all are like, you know, so serious. I can't see your faces. You could be smirking at me right now, you know. So okay, never mind. Yes, thank you so much for the laugh, Ranjini. You know, it can get a little bit lonely if you're like talking to the screen and you're like, that's it, you know. Raihana, you're talking to the screen, okay, and enjoying it too. So that's the scary part. Okay, so you all right so far with this?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna switch off this presentation, and then the person who's gonna present next, I'm gonna record that. So I'm gonna have short clips like that. So it's a lot easier for you to access data. Is that okay?
Yes, doctor.
All right, cool.
Sure, Doctor.